Don't say anything. The black cook saved the billionaire boss after catching her husband trying to do that. Keisha's hand flew to Patricia's mouth just as the bedroom door began to open. Don't say anything, she whispered, her eyes wide, her heart pounding like a war drum. On the other side of the door, Richard's voice echoed down the hallway, cold and calculating, as if he were ordering new shoes. She's 46, no children. Her parents are dead. It will all be his. We'll finish this tonight, quietly. Keisha's heart sank into her stomach. Patricia, the woman who had given her a chance when no one else would, was being planned to die at the hands of her own husband. And she, a simple 32-year-old cook who could barely afford the rent on her Brooklyn apartment, had just discovered a murder plot. Keisha Williams never imagined that her routine of preparing breakfast at 5 in the morning at the Hamptons mansion would turn into a matter of life and death. An orphan since the age of 16, she had learned to survive on hard work and low wages. When she got the job at the home of Patricia Blackwell, CEO of the largest luxury hotel chain in the country, she thought she would finally have stability. Patricia always treated her with respect. She asked about his plans, praised his dishes, and even invited him to sit at the table when he dined alone. He was different from other wealthy employers Keisha had known. There was humanity in those blue eyes. But Richard had always been a sinister shadow in that house. Tall, charming, and completely useless, he lived off his wife while flirting with any woman who crossed his path. Keisha had noticed the empty looks he gave Patricia, the way he rolled his eyes when she talked about business, how he smiled falsely during gala dinners. Now, hidden in the master bedroom closet, the two women listened to Richard continue his phone conversation. Don't worry, it will seem natural. Work stress, you know how it is. The doctor even warned her, that she should relax more. Patricia trembled in Keisha's hands, tears streaming silently down her face. The billionaire who ran hotel empires around the world was discovering that the man she slept with every night was planning to kill her for money. Keisha took a deep breath and did something that would change both their lives forever. She took Patricia's cell phone, activated the recording mode, and whispered in her ear, "Trust me." As Richard continued to detail his macabre plan to his accomplice on the other end of the line, Keisha recorded every word, every detail, every piece of evidence they would need to destroy that man completely. What Richard didn't know was that he was talking to the wrong person. Because Keisha Williams had survived on the streets, had faced powerful men before, and knew exactly how to use his weapons against him. If you're enjoying this story of how a cook saved her boss from a murderous husband, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what comes next will show that underestimating a woman who has nothing to lose can be the most costly mistake of a man's life. The next few hours were the longest of Keisha's life. After Richard ended the call and left the house to take care of some business, she and Patricia went down to the kitchen in deathly silence. Patricia was shaking like a leaf, still processing that the man she had shared a bed with for 8 years was planning to kill her as if it were just another business deal. "Keisha," Patricia whispered, sitting down on the stool at the kitchen island, "you saved my life today. But now, what do we do? He'll realize we know." Keisha poured Patricia a cup of chamomile tea, her steady hands contrasting with her boss's despair. "First, we need to act like nothing happened. Second, we need to be smarter than he and her." What Patricia didn't know was that Keisha Williams had been forged in adversity that would make anyone give up. Orphaned at 16, she had lived on the streets of Detroit for 2 years before getting his first job as a cleaner in a hospital. There, she witnessed dishonest doctors falsifying reports, nurses stealing medication, and administrators embezzling public health funds. Keisha learned that powerful people always underestimated those they considered invisible. She also learned to document everything. When she got a job at a law firm in Manhattan, she discovered that the senior partner was laundering money for the mafia. Instead of reporting it immediately, Keisha spent 6 months collecting evidence, recording conversations, and photographing documents. When she finally handed everything over to the FBI, the operation resulted in the arrest of 23 people, including 2 federal judges. The $50,000 reward paid for his culinary studies and his move to the Hamptons. Now, watching Patricia cry silently, Keisha felt that familiar calculating coldness take over. Richard had made the classic mistake of powerful men, assuming that a black cook from Brooklyn posed no threat. "Patricia," Keisha said, picking up his cell phone, "I need you to tell me everything about your finances. Bank accounts, investments, life insurance, wills, powers of attorney. Everything." "Why?" Patricia asked, wiping away her tears. Because men like Richard never act alone. He has accomplices, he has a financial plan, and he's probably already moving money around. Keisha paused, his eyes shining with a determination that made Patricia sit up straight. And greedy people always leave traces. As Patricia opened her laptop and began showing Keisha the accounts, they heard the front door open. Richard had returned, whistling cheerfully as if he hadn't just planned a murder. "Honey," he called from the entryway, "I brought you flowers. And that French wine you love." Keisha and Patricia looked at her. He was speeding up the plan. "Go on," Keisha whispered. "Act normal. I'll stay in the kitchen and prepare dinner." "And Patricia," she held her boss's arm firmly, "trust me. I've dealt with men worse than he." Patricia approached her husband with a forced smile, while Keisha remained in the kitchen, seemingly focused on preparing the main course. But her ears were attentive to every word of the conversation. "You look tired, honey," said Richard, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Maybe you should take something to relax after dinner. That medicine the doctor prescribed for anxiety." "Sure," replied Patricia, her voice slightly shaky but controlled. "You always take such good care of me." Keisha smiled as she seasoned the salmon. Richard was being even more obvious than she had imagined. Arrogant men always underestimated a woman's intelligence, especially a woman he considered inferior. While preparing the hollandaise sauce, Keisha discreetly activated the recording app on Patricia's cell phone, which was strategically positioned on the counter. Every word Richard said was being documented. "Keisha," Richard called from the dining room, her voice laden with condescension, "serve dinner in 20 minutes. And don't forget to open the wine I brought. It's special for the occasion." On the kitchen counter, Richard had left a small empty glass bottle, the kind used for liquid medicine. She discreetly photographed it with his own cell phone. At 9 o'clock that night, while serving dessert, Keisha watched Richard repeatedly urge Patricia to drink more wine. "Relax, honey. You work too hard. You deserve to rest." What Richard didn't know was that Keisha had discreetly replaced the special wine with an identical bottle that she kept in the wine cellar. Whatever he had added to that wine was now poured down the kitchen sink. When Patricia pretended to feel dizzy and went to her room to rest, Richard remained in the living room, making another phone call. This time, Keisha was strategically positioned behind the office door, recording every word. "It's done," Richard said on the phone, her voice cold and calculating. "She drank it all. In a few hours, it will look like she went to sleep and never woke up. The doctor has already been warned about her stress. He'll sign the natural death certificate without any problems." Keisha felt the adrenaline rush through her veins. Richard wasn't just a greedy husband, he had a whole network of accomplices. A corrupt doctor, probably dishonest lawyers, maybe even contacts at the registry office. "Is the money guaranteed?" Richard continued. "Perfect. 500 million is more than enough to start a new life. And that little girl I met in Miami. Yes, she'll love being the new Mrs. Nelson." Keisha then did something Richard could never have expected. She called her old FBI contact, Agent Sarah Martinez, who had worked on the law firm case years ago. "Sarah, it's Keisha Williams. I need an urgent favor. I have evidence of conspiracy to commit murder, and I need it officially documented tonight." Every piece was moving on the board, but Richard still thought he was playing alone. What he didn't realize was that every arrogant move, every condescending word directed at her simple cook, was being used to construct the perfect trap. As he prepared for what he believed to be his final victory, Keisha Williams was preparing the most complete humiliation a greedy man could face. Because when you underestimate a woman who has already survived hell, you're not just making a mistake, you're signing her own death warrant. At 3 in the morning, while Richard slept soundly believing he had executed the perfect crime, Keisha was in the kitchen coordinating the most complex operation of her life. Agent Sarah Martinez arrived discreetly through the back entrance, accompanied by 2 evidence technicians. "Keisha," Sarah whispered, "we need everything. Every recording, every photo, every detail you've got." "I have more than you can imagine," Keisha replied, connecting 3 different cell phones to the table. Richard not only confessed to the murder, he detailed the entire network of corruption. While the technicians set up professional recording equipment throughout the house, Keisha revealed the extent of the evidence she had collected. Photos of the empty bottle, recordings of all of Richard's phone calls, even printouts of his conversations with his mistress in Miami, where he detailed how he would spend the widow's $500 million. Dr. Morrison is the corrupt doctor, Keisha explained, showing a photo she had secretly taken of the prescription pad Richard had dropped. He has signed 3 suspicious death certificates in the last 2 years. All wealthy wives of younger men. Sarah shook her head in amazement. How did you find this out? I grew up on the streets, Sarah. It's his name, not hers. I learned that information is power, and powerful people always leave traces when they feel secure. Keisha paused, his eyes shining with cold determination. Richard made the mistake of treating me like furniture. Invisible, but always present. While they were organizing the evidence, Patricia quietly went down to the kitchen. She was pale but determined, carrying a bulky folder. I brought everything you asked for, she said, handing documents to Sarah. Insurance policies, wills, powers of attorney that Richard made me sign as a precaution. Now I realize he's been preparing for years. Keisha leafed through the documents, her experience with financial fraud cases allowing her to identify suspicious patterns immediately. Look at this, she said, pointing to a power of attorney dated 6 months ago. He can move all her bank accounts without authorization. And here, she turned a page, a change to the will made last week. He changed everything so that I would only inherit 10%, Patricia murmured, seeing the documents clearly for the first time. The rest would be donated to charity, probably ghost accounts controlled by him. Sarah documented each page as Keisha explained how Richard had manipulated Patricia over the years. He isolated her from her friends, convinced her to fire her old lawyers, even made her switch doctors to Dr. Morrison. At 5 in the morning, Richard went downstairs for breakfast, expecting to find a dead wife and a panicked cook. Instead, he found Keisha calmly preparing breakfast, as if it were any other normal day. Good morning, sir, Keisha said politely. Mrs. Patricia is still sleeping. It must have been the relaxing wine that his wife brought yesterday. Richard smiled smugly, interpreting Keisha's calm demeanor as complete ignorance of what had happened. Exactly. She works too hard, she needs to rest. He paused, observing Keisha with condescension. You can take the day off today. I'll take care of everything here. That's very kind of her, sir, Keisha replied, serving the coffee. But I'd rather keep working. The lady has always been good to me. Richard laughed dismissively. You're dedicated, I'll give you that. But people like you, well, you always know your place, don't you? Every arrogant word was another nail in the coffin Keisha was building for him. I've always known my place, yes sir, she replied, discreetly activating the recorder in her apron pocket. While Richard sipped his coffee and checked his cell phone messages, celebrating the success of the operation with his accomplices, Keisha watched his every move. He called Dr. Morrison at 7 in the morning. Doctor, you need to come check on my wife urgently. She's not waking up, she looks very ill. Her voice dripped with fake concern. Yes, just as we discussed. Stress from work, you always warned about that. Dr. Morrison arrived in 40 minutes, carrying a medical bag and pre-filled paperwork. Keisha served him coffee too, remaining invisible but attentive to every word exchanged between the two men. Where is she? Asked the doctor, her professional voice masking the conspiracy. In the bedroom. Keisha, Richard called condescendingly, go wake Mrs. Patricia. Tell her the doctor is here. Keisha climbed the stairs slowly, each step calculated. In the bedroom, Patricia was awake, dressed, and prepared for what was to come. It's time, Keisha whispered. I'm scared, Patricia admitted. I was scared once too, Keisha replied, holding her hand. When I had nowhere to sleep, when I was accused of crimes I didn't commit, when powerful men tried to destroy me. But I learned that fear only exists when you don't have a plan. Patricia nodded, took a deep breath, and went downstairs. Dr. Morrison was already organizing his papers on the living room table, ready to sign a death certificate without even examining the victim. Patricia! Richard exclaimed dramatically when he saw her appear. Thank God you're okay. I was so worried you weren't waking up. The doctor looked up, confused. But I thought that I was dead? Patricia finished calmly, her eyes fixed on Richard. Sorry to disappoint you. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard blinked several times, his brain trying to process how his perfect plan had failed. Dr. Morrison discreetly began putting away his papers. "I don't understand," Richard muttered. "You drank all the wine, I saw." "You saw what my cook allowed you to see," Patricia replied. "Keisha, can you call our guests?" The front door opened and Sarah Martinez entered, followed by 4 federal agents. Richard recoiled, finally understanding the magnitude of the mistake he had made. "Dr. Morrison, Richard Nelson, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud," Sarah announced as the agents advanced with handcuffs. "This is a misunderstanding." Richard shouted, her arrogance evaporating instantly. "Keisha, tell them. You know her, you know she would never hurt Patricia." Keisha walked slowly until she was face to face with Richard. For the first time in 8 years, she looked him straight in the eye as an equal. "Mr. Richard," she said, her voice soft but powerful, "I have always known my place. My place is on the side of justice." As the agents led Richard away in handcuffs, he shouted about how a mere cook had destroyed his life. What he didn't yet know was that Keisha Williams had done much more than just save Patricia. She had dismantled an entire criminal network that had been operating for years, and the ripples of the tsunami of justice were just beginning to spread. Because when you underestimate a woman who has faced hell and chosen to rise rather than surrender, you're not just making a strategic mistake, you're awakening a force of nature who won't rest until every injustice is corrected and every guilty party pays the full price for her arrogance. The arrest of Richard and Dr. Morrison was just the first domino to fall. What they didn't know was that Keisha had spent the last 48 hours building an avalanche that would destroy not only him, but the entire network of corruption he believed was protected by power and money. While Richard was being processed at the police station, shouting about his rights and demanding expensive lawyers, Keisha was at the mansion coordinating the second phase of the operation with Agent Sarah Martinez. The recordings she had collected revealed something much bigger than a simple murder plot. Richard had mentioned other similar cases during his phone calls. Dr. Morrison signed at least 6 suspicious death certificates in the last 3 years, Sarah explained, analyzing the documents Keisha had secretly photographed. All wealthy wives, all with younger husbands, all officially killed by stress or natural causes. Patricia, still processing the betrayal, looked at the papers with growing horror. "My God, Keisha. Richard wasn't just trying to kill me, he was operating a serial inheritance murder scheme by he." Keisha nodded gravely. "And best of all, he documented everything on his cell phones. Messages with the other husbands, bank transfers, even photos celebrating with his mistress in Miami after each success." The third twist came when Keisha revealed her most brilliant move. During her months working at the house, she had discreetly installed an automatic backup app on Richard's cell phone, something she had learned during his days investigating corruption in law firms. "Every message, every photo, every call from the last 8 months is saved on secure servers," she explained, showing terabytes of evidence on her laptop. "Richard thought he was being smart by deleting conversations, but I had access to everything in real time." Sarah shook her head in admiration. "Keisha, you've practically handed the FBI the biggest inheritance-motivated serial murder operation of the last 10 years. As they spoke, Patricia's cell phone rang. It was Richard's lawyer, Dr. Winchester, calling desperately. Patricia put it on speakerphone with a nod from Keisha. "Patricia dear," said the lawyer's soft voice, "I'm sure this misunderstanding can be resolved discreetly. Richard is very shaken, of course, but with the right psychological treatment and perhaps generous financial compensation to forget this incident." Keisha smiled coldly and nodded to Patricia, who replied calmly, "Dr. Winchester, I think it would be best to discuss this directly with his representative." "Of course, who is his lawyer? We can schedule a meeting today." "Actually," Patricia paused dramatically, "my representative is right here beside me. Keisha Williams." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When Dr. Winchester finally spoke again, her voice had lost all condescension. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. Keisha Williams is your cook." "She was my cook," Patricia corrected him. "Now she's my personal security consultant, licensed private investigator, and the person responsible for discovering that his client was not only trying to murder me, but operating a serial killing ring all over the East Coast." The call was abruptly ended. 2 hours later, Richard's cell phone rang in his prison cell. It was her mistress from Miami, Stephanie, hysterical and screaming into the speakerphone while federal agents recorded the conversation. "Richard, his idiot. My picture is in all the newspapers as your accomplice. My parents disowned me, I lost my job, my friends won't answer my calls anymore, she screamed. And I heard that her black cook had recordings of us celebrating the deaths of the other wives. How could you be stupid enough to let yourself be fooled by a maid? Richard gripped the bars of the cell, finally understanding the extent of his humiliation. Keisha Williams, a woman he had treated like furniture for 8 years, had orchestrated her complete destruction using nothing but intelligence, patience, and his own arrogance against her. She's not just a maid, Richard muttered, his voice breaking for the first time. She's smarter than all of us. But Richard's humiliation was just beginning. That afternoon, national newspapers splashed devastating headlines. Heroic cook dismantles billionaire murder ring. How a domestic worker saved 6 lives and unmasked $1 million scheme. From kitchen to FBI, the incredible story of Keisha Williams. Social media exploded. The video of Richard being arrested while shouting insults about a mere cook went viral with millions of views. Memes about rich men being defeated by working women dominated Twitter for weeks. Patricia, still processing everything, looked at Keisha with genuine admiration. How did you know he was lying from the start? Keisha smiled softly. I grew up in places where liars are experts at deception, Patricia. Richard was an amateur compared to some of the men I've faced. He made the classic mistake of privileged men. He thought intelligence came with a bank account. That night, while Richard cried in his cell, realizing he would not only lose Patricia and her fortune, but would likely spend the rest of his life in prison, Keisha was in the mansion's dining room signing a contract as Patricia's personal security consultant, with a salary of $200,000 a year. Keisha, said Patricia, pouring French champagne, you didn't just save my life. You probably saved the lives of dozens of other women that Richard and his accomplices would have murdered in the future. Keisha raised her glass, his eyes shining with the satisfaction of someone who had turned years of humiliation into perfect justice. Patricia, I always knew that one day intelligence would triumph over arrogance. I just didn't know it would be so satisfying to watch. As they toasted, Richard was discovering that his bank account had been frozen, his assets seized as evidence, and that at least 15 families of previous victims had already filed criminal and civil lawsuits against him. The man who had woken up that morning believing he had committed the perfect crime slept on the cold floor of a cell, knowing that his life of privilege was over forever, destroyed by the brilliant intelligence of a woman he had deemed too inferior to be a threat. Because when you spend 8 years treating someone as invisible, you don't realize that person is watching, learning, documenting his every move, until the moment she decides it's time for you to find out who really should be afraid of whom in this story. Richard had completely underestimated the power of a woman who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. And now, as he faced the prospect of decades in prison, he finally understood that the biggest mistake of his life was believing that Keisha Williams was just a cook. She was a force of nature disguised as a domestic worker, and he had just found that out the hard way. 6 months later, Keisha Williams sat in his new office overlooking Manhattan, wearing an elegant navy blue blazer and reviewing consulting contracts for 3 other billionaires who had requested his personal security services after reading about the Richard Nelson case. Her private investigation company, Williams Security Solutions, had grown exponentially. Business magazines splashed her photo across their covers with headlines like "The Woman Who Dismantled a Murder Ring Using Only Intelligence," and "From Cook to CEO, How Keisha Williams Redefined Personal Security." Patricia walked into the office carrying French champagne and smiling proudly. Keisha, I just heard that you've been invited to speak at Harvard University about criminal investigation. And look at this, she showed her a magazine, you're on the list of the 30 most influential women in the country. Keisha smiled, remembering the days when Richard treated her like furniture. Funny how life comes full circle, isn't it? At that very moment, Richard was in his federal prison cell, wearing an orange uniform and cleaning toilets, ironically, doing exactly the kind of work he considered inferior when he mocked Keisha. Her fortune had been confiscated, her mistress had abandoned him, and even his former wealthy friends refused to visit or take his calls. Dr. Morrison had lost his medical license and was facing at least 20 years in prison. The corrupt lawyer Dr. Winchester was being investigated by the FBI for complicity in fraud. The entire murder network had collapsed like dominoes, resulting in 16 arrests and over $200 million in reparations for the victims' families. You know what satisfies me the most? Keisha said, toasting Patricia. It's not seeing Richard suffer. It's knowing that every woman he planned to kill is now alive and free because of a simple cook he completely underestimated. He had underestimated a woman who had learned to survive on the streets, who had turned every humiliation into fuel for her determination, and who had used his own arrogance as a weapon against him. While Keisha signed million-dollar contracts and planned to expand her company internationally, Richard discovered that his cell was shared with other criminals who had no respect for men who murdered their wives for money. Keisha's true revenge was not to destroy Richard, it was to build an empire that he could never achieve, even in his best days of freedom. She proved that the greatest defeat you can inflict on someone who underestimates him is to become everything they could never be, even with all the advantages in the world. Richard tried to reduce me to an insignificant cook, Keisha reflected, looking out the window of her top-floor office, but he ended up turning me into the person who destroyed her entire life using nothing but the brain he thought I didn't have. If this story of how intelligence always triumphs over arrogance touched his heart, subscribe to the channel for more real stories of people who turned injustice into inspiring victories, because sometimes karma needs a little help from us to deliver justice.